These are two analog meters. Analog meters have needles that respond to light and have circular exposure calculators. The meter on the left is a classic studio meter, the Sekonic L398A, and the other is just a simple pocket meter, the Sekonic L158. Even though the studio meter looks a lot more complex, they both do the same thing and both are very easy to use. So why use a handheld light meter when your SLR or rangefinder has a built-in meter? Mainly for more precise light measurements. You already know that a camera's built-in meter doesn't measure incident light, but a lot of handheld meters do. Also, in fancier meters, such as the L398A on the left, there's an attachment for measuring contrasting light, which is really helpful when taking studio portraits. So let's take a look at these meters, starting simple with the L158. The Sekonic L158 is a simple pocket meter and is about as basic as it gets. I've had mine for many years and it still works great. I use it all the time for field shooting, especially with medium format cameras. Like the larger L398A, it doesn't require a battery, which is very helpful. There are a few new handheld meters available as simple as the L158. One of them is the Sekonic L208, which is very popular. There's a red needle in the window of the L158. The manual calls it a pointer, but it's a needle just like in the SLRs we've covered. It moves back and forth responding to light. Next to the needle is a guide mark, but it's really like an aperture ring. It should be pretty obvious how this meter works. It's a simple matched needle metering system just like on the Canon F1. You turn the guide mark with the meter's outer dial and position the middle of the ring over the needle. Here's where analog meters really shine. There's a shutter speed scale with shutter values printed in black. You can look at a variety of shutter speeds and aperture values for the same exposure. When the guide mark is positioned over the needle, look at the aperture scale. This shows a range of apertures and corresponding shutter speeds on the shutter speed dial above. So if you're looking for a shallow depth of field, look at larger aperture settings such as f2.8. Right above it is the corresponding shutter speed. The same goes for smaller apertures such as f16. Look above that to get the corresponding shutter speed. That's what I love about analog meters, instant access to exposure combinations. The ISO scale and setting is on the bottom of the dial. You need to set this to match your film speed in your camera to get an accurate reading. We'll be metering on this simple still life setup. I used a few LED lights to evenly distribute the light for this demonstration. There's a couple shadows here and there, but overall not much contrast. Being a reflective meter, hold the L158 towards the subject. Adjust the guide mark until it centers on the needle. I'm waving the meter around to see if there's a big difference in readings. There's not. Now take a look at the shutter speed dial and the aperture dial. You could shoot at 1/125 at around f2 to f2.8 for a shallow depth of field shot. Or you could shoot at about 1/15 of a second around and between f5.6 to f8 for a greater depth of field. You don't have to be ultra precise with these readings. Getting really close has always been good enough for me. This is a real beauty of analog meters. You have all the shutter speed and aperture combinations laid out before you. The L398A is designed primarily for studio use. It has a lot more numbers and dials than the L158, but does the same thing essentially. Common to all analog meters is a needle that responds to light. Meter readings are taken in foot candles. A foot candle is a unit of illumination, which is all we really need to know since this isn't a physics class. The foot candle scale measurement acts as a base for all measurements on this meter. Covering the light sensor is a lumisphere. This is used to take incident meter readings. The light sensor is under the removable lumisphere. The scale mark is used to find our exposure. Above the scale mark is a fixed dial with a range of numbers. These are the same as the numbers on the foot candle scale. You look at the foot candle number the needle is pointing to and then position the scale mark to that number on the dial scale. This sets up the rest of the scales to the proper exposure values. You set the ISO by rotating the film sensitivity selector knob, which is next to the cine scale. The stopper button is used to take a meter reading. You press the stopper button until the needle stabilizes. The needle will stay in position when the stopper button is released. The aperture scale is used to read aperture, and the shutter speed scale is used to read shutter speed. The lumisphere is attached to the meter so it's ready to read incident light. Hold the meter near the subject and face the lumisphere towards the camera. Press the stopper button and take your reading. Set the scale mark to what the needle points to on the foot candle scale. In our reading, it's 20. You can now get accurate shutter speed and aperture combinations. As you see, the shutter speeds are very low since the ISO is set to 125. The film speed is really too low for this setup. Our best chance for getting a good shot is to put the camera on a tripod. Both meters operate just about the same, one being a simple match needle system and the other a little more sophisticated. Both are not hard to use.